Royal farewell marks historic turning point. Why Spain's final day in Denmark signals a major shift in European power dynamics. Welcome to BNews. The ornate halls of Amalienborg Palace echoed with final farewells on November 16, 2025, as Their Majesties King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia of Spain concluded a state visit to Denmark that had captivated both nations and generated significant diplomatic outcomes beneath the ceremonial pageantry. What began 3 days earlier with the thunder of ceremonial cannons, the precision of honor guards, and the glittering spectacle of a state banquet concluded today with handshakes, embraces, and the quiet satisfaction of substantive agreements reached and relationships strengthened between two European monarchies navigating the complexities of 21st-century governance. State visits represent one of diplomacy's oldest and most carefully choreographed instruments, multi-day affairs where heads of state are hosted with maximum ceremony, creating opportunities for high-level political discussions, business delegations to forge commercial connections, cultural exchanges to deepen mutual understanding, and symbolic gestures to demonstrate friendship and shared values. The Spanish-Danish state visit that concluded today exemplified how these ancient diplomatic forms remain relevant when executed with strategic purpose rather than mere tradition. But what actually transpired during these 3 intensive days beyond the palace dinners and museum tours? What agreements were reached that might reshape bilateral relations between Copenhagen and Madrid? How did the personal chemistry between Europe's 2 youngest reigning monarchs influence outcomes? And what does this visit's conclusion reveal about the broader reconfiguration of European alliances and priorities as the continent confronts challenges ranging from energy security to defense cooperation to managing relations with an increasingly unpredictable global environment? If you're serious about understanding how diplomacy actually works beyond the photo opportunities, want exclusive insights into the agreements and understandings that shape European cooperation, and appreciate analysis that treats state visits as the strategic instruments they truly are rather than just ceremonial theater, smash that subscribe button immediately and activate all notifications because we're delivering the sophisticated coverage that respects your intelligence and connects diplomatic events to real-world consequences. State visits follow protocols refined over centuries, creating experiences that balance maximum hospitality with opportunities for substantive engagement. The Spanish-Danish visit that concluded November 16, 2025, adhered to these established patterns while reflecting the particular relationship and priorities of the 2 nations involved. The visit began November 14 with King Felipe and Queen Letizia's arrival in Copenhagen, where they were received by King Frederick X and Queen Mary with full military honors. The Spanish monarchs were conveyed to Amalienborg Palace in horse-drawn carriages, a deliberate choice that evokes historical continuity and creates the visual spectacle that distinguishes state visits from ordinary diplomatic encounters. That evening's state banquet brought together the political, business, cultural, and social elites from both nations, creating networking opportunities that extended far beyond the royal principles. King Frederick's toast to his Spanish guests emphasized shared European values, the strength of Danish-Spanish friendship, and cooperation on challenges from renewable energy to Arctic research to supporting Ukraine. King Philippe's response highlighted Spain's admiration for Danish design, innovation, and social model while noting opportunities for enhanced collaboration. These speeches, while ceremonial in tone, signaled priority areas that working-level officials had identified during months of preparation and that would receive focus during the visit's substantive sessions. The following days combined symbolic gestures with practical engagement. The Spanish monarchs visited Danish companies representing sectors where collaboration potential exists, renewable energy firms pioneering offshore wind technology that Spain is rapidly deploying, biotechnology companies whose research might attract Spanish investment, design studios exemplifying the Danish aesthetic that influences global markets. They toured cultural institutions including the National Museum, where exhibitions on Viking history resonated with Spain's own complex historical relationship with Nordic seafarers who once raided Iberian coasts. Queen Letizia, a former journalist who maintains strong interest in media and education issues, met with Danish counterparts to discuss challenges facing journalism in the digital age and approaches to media literacy education. King Felipe, who has worked to modernize Spanish monarchy and distance it from the corruption scandals that tarnished his father's reign, engaged in private discussions with King Frederick about navigating the tensions between tradition and transparency that all contemporary monarchies confront. The business dimension of the Spanish state visit to Denmark carried particular weight given both nations' economic priorities and the opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. Spain and Denmark, while both EU members sharing common European market access, have complementary economic profiles that create collaboration potential. Denmark excels in areas including renewable energy technology, pharmaceuticals, maritime industries, agricultural technology, and design, while maintaining a highly skilled workforce, strong research institutions, and business-friendly regulatory environment. Spain offers a much larger domestic market, strategic geographic position connecting Europe to Africa and Latin America, growing renewable energy sector requiring substantial technology and investment, and increasingly sophisticated industrial capabilities particularly in transportation and aerospace. The business delegation accompanying King Felipe and Queen Letizia included executives from major Spanish companies seeking Danish partners or customers, while Danish business leaders viewed the visit as opportunity to expand their Spanish operations or access Spanish connections to Latin American markets where Spain maintains historical ties and linguistic advantages. Several specific agreements and memoranda of understanding were signed during the visit, addressing areas from renewable energy cooperation to scientific research collaboration to cultural exchange programs. Perhaps most significantly, Danish wind energy companies announced substantial investments in Spanish offshore wind projects, taking advantage of Spain's commitment to dramatically expand renewable capacity as part of its energy transition and EU climate obligations. These commercial agreements, while technically independent of the state visit, received negotiation momentum and political endorsement from the high-level attention the visit created. The message to business communities in both nations was clear. Political leadership considers Danish-Spanish commercial relations a priority worthy of royal attention, creating confidence that encouraged companies to pursue opportunities they might otherwise have considered too risky or complicated. Queen Letizia's particular focus on education and digital innovation led to agreements on student exchange programs, joint research initiatives in artificial intelligence and biotechnology, and cooperation on addressing online misinformation, an issue both nations recognize as threatening democratic discourse and social cohesion. The political and strategic dimensions of the Spanish-Danish state visit, while less visible than ceremonial events and business signings, carried substantial weight given Europe's current security environment and the challenges confronting the European Union. Spain and Denmark approach certain EU policy questions from different perspectives. Denmark has traditionally been more Atlanticist and skeptical of deeper EU integration, maintaining opt-outs from the euro and certain justice policies, while Spain has been strongly pro-integration and views the EU as guarantor of its democratic transition and economic modernization. However, both nations share fundamental commitments to liberal democracy, rule of law, and the European project, even while disagreeing on specific institutional arrangements. The private discussions between King Frederick and King Felipe, while not producing formal policy agreements, as constitutional monarchs they don't make policy, allowed for frank exchanges about European challenges and the role of monarchy in contemporary governance. Both kings have assumed their thrones relatively recently, Felipe in 2014 following his father's abdication amid scandal, Frederick in 2024 following his mother's planned abdication, and both face the challenge of maintaining public support for monarchical institutions in increasingly egalitarian societies where hereditary privilege requires careful justification. They share recognition that modern constitutional monarchs can provide value through symbolic continuity, nonpartisan national unity, diplomatic relationship building, and championing causes that might receive insufficient attention from elected politicians focused on short-term electoral considerations. The Spanish and Danish experiences offer somewhat different models. Spain's transition from dictatorship to democracy positioned monarchy as democracy's guarantor, while Denmark's long stable democratic monarchy emphasizes cultural continuity and national identity. Learning from each other's approaches and challenges benefits both institutions. The visit also facilitated discussions between Spanish and Danish government officials on EU policy coordination, particularly regarding energy security, defense cooperation, and managing relations with southern Mediterranean nations where Spain's geographic position and historical connections give it particular influence. Denmark's Arctic territories, Greenland and the Faroe Islands, face challenges from climate change and increasing great power interests that require European solidarity, while Spain's exposure to irregular migration from Africa creates pressures requiring comprehensive EU responses. As the final formalities concluded on November 16, 2025, and King Felipe and Queen Letizia's aircraft departed Copenhagen carrying them back to Madrid, the state visit's assessment would unfold across multiple timeframes and dimensions. The immediate media coverage focused on ceremonial highlights, the elegant fashion choices, the chemistry between the royal couples, the historic venues and cultural programs. Business press would track whether commercial agreements signed during the visit materialized into actual investments and whether trade flows between the nations increased in subsequent quarters. Diplomatic analysts would monitor whether the personal relationships established or strengthened during these 3 days translated into enhanced policy coordination on European issues. Historians would eventually evaluate the visit within longer narratives about Spanish-Danish relations, the evolution of constitutional monarchy, and Europe's trajectory through the challenging middle decades of the 21st century. For the Danish and Spanish royal families personally, the visit represented success in executing complex, high-stakes events where protocol mistakes, security failures, or diplomatic gaffes could have created embarrassment and undermined the intended purposes. King Frederick and Queen Mary, hosting their first Spanish state visit since assuming the throne, demonstrated the competence and grace that successful state visits require. King Felipe and Queen Letizia, representing Spain abroad as they have done dozens of times, fulfilled their role as national ambassadors while advancing specific diplomatic and commercial objectives their government had identified. Beyond these measurable outcomes, state visits generate intangible but valuable results. They signal to both domestic and international audiences that bilateral relations matter enough to warrant the highest level of attention. They create media coverage that educates publics about partner nations and fosters mutual understanding. They build personal relationships between leaders that can prove valuable when crises require rapid communication and cooperation, and they demonstrate that nations value diplomacy, dialogue, and peaceful cooperation over the military confrontation and zero-sum competition that have caused such suffering throughout history. In an era often characterized by political polarization, diplomatic dysfunction, and declining international cooperation, successful state visits like Spain's to Denmark remind us that alternatives exist, that nations can engage each other with mutual respect and seek common interests rather than focusing exclusively on differences and conflicts. Now we want to hear from you. In an age of instant digital communication and video conferencing, do elaborate multi-day state visits still justify their substantial costs and diplomatic resources, or should nations redirect these resources toward more practical forms of cooperation and assistance? Share your perspective in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for continued coverage of European diplomacy, royal affairs, and the strategic relationships that shape our continent's future in ways both visible and hidden.